The sounds of laughter and music, accompanied by the aromas of coffee and pastry, drifted into a cafe's back room. This cafe was in the US-controlled part of Austria, in Salzburg. In the cafe's back room, lying on a corner of a table, an improvised desk, was a utilitarian calendar, topped with 1948. The current page was headed, July, in German. Next to the 15th, there was a small M in careful German script. A question mark had been hastily added. Near the 16th, there was an M followed by an exclamation point. Near the 28th, in the same careful German script, was Von Korean Oper, followed by 2 question marks. The coffee's aroma, accompanied by apple, cinnamon, and vanilla notes, seemed to envelop Dr. Harold Moss as he slowly revived. His head throbbed in sync with the sharp aches in his ribs. Eyes closed, he recalled stepping out of a U.S. Army Jeep at the Salzburg Hauptbahnhof, the city's main train station. The corporal driving the Jeep had said, "My orders say train station only. The motor pool lieutenant was up my ass. Sorry, sir. On my case about it." Dr. Moss had accepted the obvious and picked up his bags, deposited near the curb. He recalled having some luck with taxis. One cabbie had spoken English well. Better still, he'd said 21 Elisabethstrasse was only a block away. He'd pointed to an alley which would shorten the walk. The next recollection was of walking along the alley, dim in the evening's fading light. 3, maybe 4 dark figures had appeared out of the shadows in the alley. The largest figure had said, "Moss." Dr. Moss had turned to see who'd spoken his name. The dark figures had suddenly begun punching him, grunting as they landed each blow. As he tried to run, someone had knocked him down, kicked his back, near a shoulder blade. Shocked by the attack, Dr. Moss hadn't cried out, only gasped when a boot kicked his ribs. He'd heard an angry shout and heavy footsteps coming towards him. The beating had stopped as the footsteps drew closer. He could recall nothing more. Now he smelled warm scents but felt cold, heard laughter but nothing was funny. He looked up to see a woman with amazingly black hair and jade-green eyes standing over him. Her expression was one of concern. She wore a dress that flattered her figure. Its high close collar, short sleeves, and silk fabric, rustling softly as she moved, pushed away all other scenes. The word Cheongsam came to him. He knew it was Cantonese for the dress she wore.
"How is it I know that?"
Moss wondered.
Moss, it is your business, your mission, your calling to know what others do not.
Why the voice of Professor Dijkstra, his PhD thesis advisor, came to him now. Moss was willing to concede not knowing why.
Grüß Gott, Herr Dr. Moss. I am Rachel Lindstrom. We expected you to arrive, but
She smiled sympathetically.
not in this condition.
Her voice was low and smooth, with the unmistakable inflections of an Austrian. Her face, to say nothing of the well-shaped silk dress, spoke of places far to the east of Austria. Lindstrom? The name was from somewhere else altogether. Moss sank back against what he guessed was his overcoat folded to serve as a pillow.
Some Edelbrand.
Seeing Moss's puzzled look, the woman continued.
Perhaps you know it as schnapps. Take it slowly.
As Moss reached for the glass, their fingers touched briefly. He noted her fingers felt warm, and wondered why it mattered to him.
"Who is this woman, and how does she know my name?"
Moss recalled the address he'd memorized. All he had was a number, a street name, and a city. He'd assumed it was an address for an office. If he was hearing music and laughter, smelling coffee and pastry, could 21 Elisabethstrasse be a cafe? He took a tentative sip of the schnapps, feeling its sharp warmth run down his throat and throughout his body. He tried to piece together the events which had led him to this place, wherever it was.
"Looking at the present company, I wouldn't be surprised if I was in Shanghai."
And immediately regretted the choice of place names. He hoped very much he hadn't been shanghaied, away from Salzburg. Moss thought back to how his journey had begun. It had started when an FBI agent handed Moss a curt note and train ticket to Washington, D.C. In D.C., a curt man in an anonymous government office had handed him a travel voucher which included a July Atlantic crossing to Southampton, England. It wasn't his first Atlantic crossing. The first had been almost 15 years prior. He'd gone to Italy to do his postdoctoral research, to ensure he was on the way to tenure at the University of Maryland. On the crossing, Moss had mostly claimed a deck chair, a blanket, and read in preparation for visiting museums and working on archaeological digs. A woman Moss had classified as more matron than maiden had attempted to draw him away from his work.
"Much as I would enjoy your company,"
Moss had pointed to an imposing stack of books.
"all this must be read by the time we land."
He'd unbent to the point of escorting, Whatever her name was, it was now as clear as the Etruscan language, a mystery. At any rate, he'd accepted the obvious. She would not be put off forever. With the knowledge there was only one day until arriving in Naples and leaving whatever her name was behind, he escorted the lady to the captain's farewell dinner. During the dinner, one of his skills as a professor had been pressed into service. He'd made all the right noises at all the right times while thinking over the book Etruscan Places by, of all people, D.H. Lawrence. Moss had raised making all the right noises to an art form while attending faculty meetings. The farewell dinner had demanded merely the effort he would have put into getting through a boring committee meeting. This trip, however, had not been boring, far from it. Someone from the crew had said, "This is only the edge of a tropical storm. Get them up here in the summer, you know. Good thing is, they're usually blown out when we see 'em." Moss had given up guessing the height of the waves he saw as he'd leaned over the railing to offer too much of his last meal to the churning, chilly North Atlantic. Worse, although it was July, the North Atlantic's chill penetrated his thin sweater. Moss regretted not having a warmer sweater.
Why me?
Creating a list of curses to rain down on the curt man's head was an appealing notion. The encounter with an English customs officer had not gone well. He'd given Moss a barely civil near interrogation. It had ended abruptly when a nondescript man whispered in the customs officer's ear. Ignoring Moss' proffered passport, the stranger had consulted Moss' travel voucher, then said,
"If you'll follow me, sir."
The man had driven Moss to
RAF Stone Cross. Your chappies are in this building, sir.
It was the only thing the man had said during the trip from seaport to airport. Moss at Chappies turned out to be a U.S. Army Air Transport Squadron. They'd rushed him out to a venerable C-47 transport plane. D-Day markings on the wings and fuselage had been visible despite added coats of paint. Moss had hoped the rest of the airplane was in better condition than its hastily applied paint. Once strapped into one of the bench seats running down the length of the plane, the passengers were left looking into the plane's central aisle, typically filled with pallets loaded with crates and cartons. There was nothing to hold on to. With the plane bouncing through the turbulent summer air, bumping into the passenger on either side was unavoidable. The C-47 had smelled of too many unpleasant things. The smell of burnt oil was inevitable, as was, Moss didn't appreciate a reminder of the smell of losing his lunch as his ship had entered the churned-up English Channel. And was that gasoline he'd smelled, the scent not quite covered by the smell of a particularly vile cigar? Good God, if it's gas, and somebody's smoking. A soldier, sitting across the aisle, had raised his voice over the engine noise to say, "You're looking a little green, sir. Maybe you want to ask Sergeant O'Malley for a barf bag or two." After Moss had lurched and staggered his way to the sergeant, he didn't have to ask for the airsick bags. O'Malley had two waiting for him. Moss had to shout over the engine's roar.
Is it my imagination, or do I smell gasoline?
He'd hoped he'd sounded diplomatic despite being assaulted by the no other word for it, stench of O'Malley's cigar.
Hogging the dummy. Spilled gas on one of the crates when we filled the tanks. Don't let it bother you, sir. It does. You got these bags and I got more. Don't miss if you gotta use them.
After a stop somewhere in France, the plane had continued on to Salzburg. It had not been a smooth ride.
I must be getting used to bumping around,
Moss had thought as he returned the bags unused. Moss's final destination was a street address in Salzburg. It didn't appear on the travel voucher. The curt man had said,
"Going to spend a lot of time in Leavenworth. We find out you've written down this address. Memorize it. Hope you don't forget it."
Moss's course through life was aided by an excellent mind for recalling visual details. The sheet of paper, stamped top secret top and bottom, bore only a street name and number. With the mental picture of it firmly in mind, Moss felt no need to write down the address. He didn't want to find out wherever or whatever Leavenworth was. It hadn't sounded good. As Moss sat in the back room, sipping schnapps and trying to make sense of the world around him, Rachel leaned across the table, her eyes locked onto his.
"We need you very much,"
she said, her voice low and husky.
"Do you know, for want of a nail, a shoe was lost? Herr Doktor, you are the nail."
Distractedly, Dr. Moss said,
Know it? Of course. It comes from a 13th century German poet, Friedank, and, later, John Gower, a 14th century English poet. Benjamin Franklin used it in Poor Richard's Almanac.
The only other thought which came to Dr. Moss seemed almost irrelevant, although faintly comforting.
The department chairman was close to incensed when I told him I wouldn't be teaching in the fall semester. I showed him the curt note. Yes, of course. Go you must, Dr. Moss. Thompson will fill in for you, if not as well. The joys of being tenured, not worrying about being canned for being unavailable to teach.
Moss felt reasonably sure he'd still have a job when he finished. And that was the devil of it. He couldn't think of what he was to finish. Nobody he talked to told him why he was going to Salzburg. They'd all only said, "Go where I send you." The FBI agent had said, "I am to bring you this message," and say, "Get going, sir. You may show the message to your department chairman and nobody else." After the third time Moss had asked, "Are you sure that's all?" the agent had added, "I'm just the messenger, sir." The curt man in the anonymous office hadn't told Moss what he was to do. He had insisted Moss stick to the itinerary on the travel voucher. Tapping the top secret sheet, he had said,
Go to this address, you're expected.
Of course Moss had asked, "What am I supposed to do there?" The curt man had shrugged and replied,
Supposed to do? I'm not cleared for that. Got no need to know. Find Moss, get him to Salzburg by 15 July. That's what I know.
Now Moss shook his head in frustration and immediately regretted it. His head and ribs throbbed, protesting about what the dark grunting figures had done to him. Worse, the room seemed to tilt and sway in a way which recalled Moss's recent time at sea.
Herr Dr. Moss.
Years later, when the question was discussed for whatever reason it came to be discussed, Moss still had no answer for the question. Why did you say to me, "Call me Harry, please," when you did? All he was sure of was he hadn't thought.
What am I saying?
Rachel hadn't so much as blinked at Harry's request. Blinked? No. Smiled ever so slightly. Yes. Harry certainly never regretted his decision, even though, at the time, he didn't know why Rachel's calling him Harry was important to him.
Herr Doctor, Harry, we know you have the skills we need. You must use them or much more than a shoe will be lost.
Rachel looked at Harry. The steely determination he'd seen in her face softened slightly.
I would be greatly distressed if that happened, Harry.
The warmth of Rachel's remark was pushed aside by puzzlement.
I'm a what? A nail. What's that mean? Think, I'm an art historian, not someone in a Humphrey Bogart movie. Why did they send me here?
Harry stood up carefully, relieved the room didn't tilt or sway. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries was almost appealing, and the laughter and music weren't quite as annoying as they had been.
I'm afraid you have the advantage of me. Is it Rachel?
The woman smiled and answered warmly.
Yeah, I am Rachel. We're in a cafe near the train station. You hear and smell where we are? It's busy much of the day. People come and go all the time, so it has much value for us. We come and go with less problem. How you are here is good fortune. Der kleine Franz stepped outside for a moment. He saw a man being pummeled by dark men. Let us say Franz did a little pummeling of his own, and the pummeling men went away. He brought the pummeled man, you, here. You will understand we looked to see who Franz brought with him.
Harry started at the revelation.
Immer mit der Ruhe, Harry. Relax. You still have what you had with you. Your money is still there.
A quick check of Harry's rumpled and stained suit coat showed Harry's passport now had traces of the shape of a boot's toe. His billfold, padded with a carefully folded travel voucher and several Austrian shilling notes, might have diminished a blow or two.
What does that tell you?
Harry began to reply and stopped.
They weren't trying to rob me, were they?
They almost certainly were not. Had Franz not stepped out for a breath of air, you might now be in the Salzach, our river. Das empfehle ich nicht. I don't recommend it.
Harry and Rachel quickly agreed the helpful cabbie, who'd shown Harry the alley, was just that. A helpful cabbie. The dark grunting men had been waiting for Harry.
How they knew if or when you'd show up.
Rachel shrugged, the dress rustled, and Harry was distracted. Rachel laughed briefly.
Hello? Harry?
What? Oh, yes, of course. Focus on the job, whatever that is. Somebody organized what happened to me. But who? Just who is they?
My God, Harry, there are so many of them. Europe. Surely you know, it's a mess. Everywhere, lines are drawn. Austria's like Germany. You know a part, including Salzburg, is controlled by the Americans. The British, French have parts. And so do the Russians. They have the part with Wien, Vienna. Maybe not so many bullets now, but there is still a battle for who gets the most of the tort. The cake?
Pie,
Harry said distractedly.
I've read about Europe, of course. But I'm a professor of art history. My specialty is the Etruscans, from over 2,000 years ago. How this helps clean up the current mess, gets us more pie.
You study Etruscans. Yes, I know this. Do you know of Sonnenegg?
No. Should I?
Harry was impatient with the "we'll only tell you a few things, and we won't say anything definite when we do" games. If he'd been playing chess, he'd have swept the board clear and demanded a fresh, honest start.
Rachel, listen. 3 weeks ago, I was revising my lecture notes when an FBI agent knocked on my door. I was told to go somewhere and see a rather curt man. I was told to memorize a street address where I'd meet someone.
Despite his growing frustration, Harry looked at Rachel briefly and smiled more than he meant to.
He, for all intents, put me on a ship to England, and then a plane I thought might blow up. I took a cabbie's advice, went up an alley I shouldn't have, got roughed up in the alley, and here I am, and I have no idea why.
Somehow Rachel looked different to Harry.
Come to think of it, just who are you and this Kleiner Franz?
Rachel laughed.
Oh, Harry, it is smart of you to ask, if a little late. I am, of course, what you might call a spy. I work for the same people who occupy the building with the curt man who sent you here. Der kleine Franz, little Franz, you would say, is here to deal with dark men.
Harry nodded.
Then I'm grateful for little Franz. You have an office here. People come and go, and nobody's the wiser. I'm in another one of those anonymous buildings, right?
Rachel's expression said, "You caught me," she said.
Well, you're here, where you were told to come, if a day late. You're safe. That's what matters.
And you won't tell me much more.
As it should be, Harry. The less you know, the less you can give away.
Harry didn't want to think about what giveaway meant or how he might give something away.
Franz rescued me from one beating. What if there's no little Franz around?
He wanted to think about almost anything else.
What can you tell me about Sonnenegg?
Him I can talk about. That is, at least some of him I can talk about. Some, honestly, I don't know. And I'm told I'm better off not knowing. Anyway, Sonnenegg has some things which he really shouldn't have, but so istus. So it is. He does. So he says.
Harry heard a gust of laughter over a particularly good joke. Was it cafe customers laughing? At the moment, Harry was willing to accept something greater was laughing at him. Be that as it may, the penny dropped. The light went on. Something clicked, Harry said.
And you want me to say whether or not Sunny Egg really has whatever it is?
Well, maybe it's closer to Sunny Corner. The egg comes from how some here say eck or corner. But I think you have hit the nail's head.
Harry chuckled.
My turn to give a linguistics lesson. Hit the nail on the head.
His chuckle was replaced by a frown.
And he's probably not Sunny, is he?
That he is not. He is a disagreeable, greedy man. If you are asking, did he send the dark men? Hard to say for sure, but he could do this. And more. He did not survive the war by being nice.
I'm going to guess Sonnenegg has an Etruscan something, or some things, and it, or they, belong to somebody else. Grave robbers, museum thefts, they're always a problem. We tell the police, and sometimes they do something, but God, there's so much lost which we know about. I have nightmares about what's lost which we don't know about, and need badly.
Harry shook his head and took a breath. He'd begun to carry on about the topic before Rachel could say so much as yes or no to Harry's guess.
Sorry, it's something which greatly upsets me.
Harry smiled apologetically.
I see that.
Rachel responded.
And I know your next question. Why are we doing police work about someone who has what is not theirs? You won't like my answer. We don't care about what it is Sonnenegg says he has. In a better world we should, but this world, this mess. We don't have time to care about what he has. What we care about is Sonnenegg may be a lever we can use. If he is, we can use him to pry open a way into. I'm only told Sonnenegg could let us into things we very much want. We are not after what Sonnenegg has. We are after Sonnenegg for what he might do for us. Otherwise, we don't want him. He is just one more disagreeable, greedy man.
As Rachel dismissed the disagreeable, greedy man with a wave of her hand, Harry spoke.
Say whatever Sonnenegg has turns out to be a forgery, a fake, a fraud? Is it betrug? Fraud?
Ja, betrug. If it is, we will know he is a betrugger, a frauder.
Fraudster would be correct,
Harry said distractedly.
We'll give him to the police, along with reasons why they want to keep him.
Surely they know about him. Why don't they do something?
Harry.
Rachel spoke his name as if she was scolding a lazy child.
You say you've read about Europe. I am sure you know people here, and these people have told you some of how it is. You must know there are too many Sonneneggs to do something about all of them.
Harry shrugged.
With the war, I've lost touch with some people I knew, worked with, mostly in Italy, but yes, I've heard stories.
The discussion about Sonnenegg continued as Rachel said.
We do not trust Sonnenegg. It's why you're here, to see if he has something real. We aren't talking about 1 or 2 trinkets. He says he has much more. If we make an agreement about what he has, we have our lever.
Rachel shrugged and said,
Possibly the rightful owner will get their things.
Her expression hardened as she told Harry,
If he is trying to do fraud with us, with others he has done it, and he would no doubt do it again. It would be time he should be put out of the way.
how Sonnenegg would be put out of the way was explained matter-of-factly.
The police do not like when someone tells them their job. We need the police, so we try to not tell them their job. With Sonnenegg they may complain, but we'll expect it. We will say what we say, the Polizeikommissar will say what he says. But putting Sonnenegg away is a good thing for everyone, so we will stay friends.
The back room door opened, and the doorway was filled by little Franz, who carried a tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a pastry that smelled of hot apples and cinnamon, and maybe vanilla from the white sauce covering the strudel.
2 Apfelstrudel und Kaffee, Frau Lindstrom.
Danke, Franz.
The giant nodded once, then raised an eyebrow, clearly asking a question.
Ihm geht's gut. Hat Kopfschmerzen und ein bisschen mehr, aber nichts Schlimmes.
No wonder those men ran when this man showed up. You're, Klein Franz? Thank you very much for rescuing me.
Bitte sehr, ist nichts.
Franz left the room after setting the tray on the table.
Not a man of many words.
Rachel chuckled.
A man of few words indeed. How much did you understand?
I'm good, have a headache, but I'm not slim. And you ordered Apfelstrudel to make sure I stay that way.
Rachel briefly chuckled again, then gave Harry an appraising look. He felt he should strike a Charles Atlas muscleman pose while Rachel studied him.
Not correct.
There was a second glance, just long enough for Harry to briefly strike the pose. Rachel grinned as he did so.
What I told him was nothing is very bad. You're schlank, trim. I would say brown hair. Oh, maybe a bit of gray. To make you look like you're a hair doctor.
Did I just hear Rachel giggle? Since when do spies giggle?
Let's see. Hair combed back. Haarscheitel. Hair part in the middle. Harry, that's not you. You are not so old as that. No what? No, cookie duster. Mustache. This is good. Your nose. You're not a boxer. This is for sure. The eyes. They are blue, which is okay.
Harry couldn't resist grinning as Rachel conducted her inventory. He knew her okay was only teasing.
The chin. Well, again, you're no boxer, but someone would break his hand on your square jaw. And how big? 1.80 meters. The propaganda people always told us you Americans are monsters. But you are, I suppose, a nice monster.
1.80 meters? That's, let's see, 6 feet's close enough. You got me there. Boxed? No, never did. Don't see the point of it. Doubt it would have done me much good in the alley. And you're right, I'm not so old. 42 in May, I'll have you know, Frau Lindstrom.
Harry relented, smiled, and continued with,
The rest? I'll say, is it Dank Shane?
Dankeschön. You mean Grüß Gott? Here we are part Bavaria, part Austria. So we say either Bavarian, Grüß Gott, God's greetings, or Austrian service, at your service. I should ask, how are you feeling?
Either the schnapps has anesthetized me, or I'm feeling better.
Harry tried some tentative twists and turns, and regretted the more enthusiastic tries.
I'll leave calisthenics for another day. Not too soon, please.
No need to plan on climbing over garden walls. Not yet.
The levity in Rachel's voice ended.
Harry, we must think Sonnenegg knows why you are here. We must think he sent the dark men. You are not some American professor to him. We had hoped you would meet, and you would play the appraiser for an interested client. Das geht nicht. It doesn't work now.
She's right, like it or not. I've been lumped in with the cloak and dagger crowd. If I ever find out who handed my name to, what did the Kurt man call it? The Central Intelligence Commission? No, Central Intelligence Agency.
Dr. Moss recalled a particularly unpleasant curse scratched into a potsherd he'd found at an archaeological dig in Tuscany. He added it to the list of curses he wanted to call down on the Kurt man, and whoever supplied Dr. Moss's name to the Kurt man.
Speaking of names, how many people named Lindstrom do I know with amazingly black hair and oh my, all the rest? May I be very rude and say you look like no Lindstrom I've ever met. That's based on all one of Professor Oscar Lindstrom from Malmö.
Harry hoped he'd made his question at least a little less rude. With a smile, Rachel answered.
Yes, you may be very rude and ask. My grandfather was a Chinese diplomat in Sweden. My grandmother said he was quite charming. She was almost a country girl in a big city for the first time. She was on a tram. A gentleman from a place she'd barely heard of offered her his seat.
Rachel sighed.
It was springtime. Flowers were poking through snow. The gentleman pointed at a garden, asked about the yellow crocuses, which my grandmother knew well. They talked about flowers. Later they talked about, much more. Springtime foolishness between a country girl and an older man, who thought he'd seen all his springs go by long ago. It ran away with both of them. One thing and another, Oma. You would say my grandmother left the disapproving eyes in Tranås, Sweden, and went to a relative in Wien, in Vienna. My papa arrived in December. He was big even as a baby. He was named Christoph because of the midwife.
How so?
While the midwife was wrapping him in a blanket, she's supposed to have said, he's so big he could carry Christ himself. The choice for his name was obvious.
And your Oma, your father, they never went back to Sweden?
Never. Uncle Klaus, Tante Freya, they stayed my family, so I stayed here is what Oma told me. She found a job in a Blumenladen, a flower shop. Papa was the child my aunt couldn't have. Why leave? Papa grew up in Vienna. He helped in the shop and he made deliveries. One delivery, the young lady who answered the door didn't step back quite fast enough as Papa came in with his flowers. He stepped rather heavily on her foot. Afterwards, concern about her foot's well-being turned into interest about much more. And here I am, service.
And he's still there?
Asked Harry, who instantly regretted the question.
Panzergrenadier, Dreienferzig, Ostfront, Kursk.
Harry chided himself.
Great thinking, Moss. Her father was drafted into the infantry and died sometime in 43, sent off to the East Front and died in the Battle of Kursk. How can I wonder why she's doing what she can to the Russians? I'm sorry. I should have thought before I asked.
It's not your fault. Everybody loses somebody. My mother writes when the Russians let mail through. She gets my letters, very nicely opened for her in advance. She can't leave. I can't go there.
Rachel shrugged. There was little more to be said. Harry watched Rachel walk across the small room and look briefly at the calendar. She carefully erased the M and question mark from the 15th. As she brushed bits of the eraser, crumbs, off the calendar, some landed on her chingsim. Rachel wiped away the crumbs. She ran her hands down the front of her dress, also wiping away the most fascinating wrinkles on her hips and perhaps the dress bodice. Harry worked at holding back the urge to say, "Here, let me do that for you." Noticing where Harry's attention was focused, Rachel commented on her dress.
This chungzum is, I confess, both a costume and a vanity. As needed, I am sometimes Tian Lian Hua, or heavenly lotus flower.
She looked directly at Harry before continuing.
And, truth be told, Herr Dr. Moss, I know I look damn good in these dresses. I know I don't need to ask you if this is true. I have, after all, been trained to be very observant.
Rachel laughed in a way Harry found both distracting and very concentrating. Harry wanted to know more about the office, about Rachel.
I'll retreat to, I hope, safer ground, and ask you, what? What can I ask? What can I ask? What on God's green earth is going on here?
Harry's puzzlement, his sense of conflict was apparent to Rachel.
Have I killed anybody? Do I buy and sell secrets? Will I sell you, how is it, up the creek?
River,
Harry said distractedly, and looked closely at Rachel. She was almost too flippant in her response, but she wasn't smiling, and he wondered why.
Sometime we'll talk about how I am here, in Salzburg. I'll say in the past I was helpful to Americans who didn't want for everybody to know what they are doing. Now it is formal, a job. Why do I do this? There are the Russians, who I do not like for many reasons, not only for Papa. Around this city there were horrors too many people pretended they didn't see. Some still do. There are places I will not go. I could not bear it. Please remember, Rachel is a Hebrew name. In my mother's family too many times now only names remain. We did not. Those who are left, I do not practice. I have very many doubts. I look around here, this city, elsewhere. There is what I know from my work. And I have doubts about much.
The despair Harry heard, underscored by what he'd read about what was found in too many places across Europe.
I can never say, I understand, but I do comprehend what she's saying.
You and I, no matter where we come from, we are very much on the same side, seeing the cake. Pie doesn't get smaller.
It seemed to everyone in the cafe's back room, the coffee was getting cold, and the Apfelstrudel would soon cool too much. What was on the tray was best tended to. Coffee preferences, black for Harry, a little cream for Rachel, were noted for later use. although neither would have said as much if asked at the moment. As they ate the strudel, Harry worked himself up to asking a very important question.
Franz said Frau Lindstrom. Is there a hair?
Rachel smiled.
Frau Lindstrom is Austrian courtesy. I was born Lindstrom, and there's nobody to change this.
She smiled at a recollection.
1 or 2 men have. They thought maybe. And maybe I had thoughts once or twice. There is never was a husband. Before the war, I was not ready. During the war, there would have been too many questions.
For a moment they applied themselves to their coffee and strudel. Then it was Harry's turn to answer a few questions.
In Washington, for next of kin, you said Peter Moss, Hagerstown, Maryland?
My brother. He kept the family home after our parents died. Pete's 11 years older. I was a surprise. I've pretty much kept to my books, sculptures, and frescoes. A Dolores Jacobi and I kept company for a while, until I learned there was a Bill Jacobi in the Merchant Marine. Turned out he had a gal in more than one port, so Dolores and he were even, and I was gone in a heartbeat. Otherwise, a few flickers, but no flames.
With a personal doorway at least ajar, they returned to their strudel and coffee. Harry was surprised when Rachel volunteered more about her work.
You asked a reasonable question about what I do. Talking about this is not what is done, but I'll tell you some things. A few times, Tian Hua has gone somewhere to take very careful note of something. A couple of times she walked a little oddly, to keep something, perhaps found when the owner of the thing wasn't looking, from becoming obvious. But mostly I'm a small cog in a big machine. I squeak on occasion, and someone may or may not supply a little oil. Most of the time I do what we're doing, talking about the sun and eggs, what they do or don't do, the things they have or don't have, and try to figure out how to put things right.
They sat there, the sounds of the cafe drifting in. Harry finished the last of his strudel and put his plate back on the tray. Thinking she was finished, he started to reach for Rachel's plate and stopped. She was idly pushing the last of her strudel around with her fork. The sound of her fork on her plate stood out from the fainter clatter of other forks on other plates in the cafe. A brief laugh, muffled by the back room's door, came through. But there was no laughter where Harry and Rachel sat. He heard her say, faintly,
Ich wollte es nicht tun.
Harry was sure Rachel was talking to herself. She didn't look at him, only stared at her plate, pushed the food around. Harry knew she'd said she didn't mean to do something. The first something Harry thought of gripped him, hard. He sat up abruptly, then leaned forward to look closely at Rachel, his arms on the table, hands open to her, ready to hold her hands. If he looked concerned, worried, troubled, her expression said she was overwhelmed by something she didn't want to remember. Softly, gently, he began to ask,
One reads, sees movies, hears stories. Have you?
Her reply was sharp.
Harry.
Rachel's eyes, now wide open, were fully on him. As unwanted memories intruded, she looked away. Her voice faded as she said,
I have told you. There is still a battle. Not so many bullets, but still people die.
Even the cafe was quiet as he heard her small, almost whisper.
I didn't mean to do it. I said the wrong thing. He wouldn't listen when I tried to take it back. It was all a bad mistake on my part. I was to look and report. Nothing more. He thought more and would not stop. I pushed him away. He tripped and fell back, hard. His head hit the edge of a table. He died. In pushing him away, I killed him. I did not mean to do it. After the hotel room was cleaned, I was told the man was born with a skull thin as an eggshell. Don't worry, we made it all go away, they told me. It doesn't help. He wasn't a nice man, but it doesn't help. For me, he does not go away. He stared at me as he died. He does not go away.
Do the right thing, Moss.
Harry stood up, offered his arms for comfort. Rachel stood up too, but did not come to him.
Now I take the check for rain. We don't know us enough yet. But thank you, Harry.
Rachel's refusal was sealed with the lightest brush of her lips on Harry's cheek. It was as if she feared anything more would have lasted much, much longer. It took more than a day or two to go from Harry arriving in Salzburg to surreptitiously investigating the Etruscanness of the items held by a disagreeable, greedy man. So how did Harry and Rachel pass the time until they could surreptitiously enter Sonneneg's residence? Did they recognize the obvious mutual attraction and not leave her small apartment for 3 days straight? No, Harry spent his nights on Franz's sofa, pillowed by his overcoat. Days were spent looking at the Sonnenegg residence's walls and gates, and looking for guards patrolling the residence. As Harry and Rachel walked through Salzburg, Harry learned about the Austrian temperament. Reserved and conservative in their thinking, Austrians are nonetheless courteous, polite. Most are punctual, almost to a fault. If it was agreed Harry and Rachel would meet someone at noon, and Harry and Rachel arrived perhaps 5 minutes late, there would be a brief look of disapproval over the obligatory handshake. So it was a surprise when a man in a great hurry collided with Rachel. What Harry thought was an annoying faux pas left Rachel white-faced and staring after the man, who hadn't the decency to excuse himself.
Rachel?
It's nothing, Harry. He was drunk.
But how many Austrian drunks quietly growl,
Myśletim za tobой, Sushka.
with a distinctly Moscovian accent? Had Harry studied Russian, he'd have known someone had growled they were watching Rachel, and that she hadn't been addressed with a term of endearment. As they walked and traveled together, they felt it was prudent to take on the guise of a couple finding they were drawn together by more than mutual business interests. They did this well, the arm-in-arm walk, the too-long glance, the lingering touch. They performed these signs of budding romance, and more, very well. The couple also investigated what remained of parts of the city away from Sonneneg's residence. They occasionally traveled outside of the city. Their ready explanation, should there be a curt question about how their time was spent, was, just in case, you understand. In the back room, over coffee, Harry proposed investigating southeast of the city, and inadvertently prompted one of their few arguments.
Harry, no. We shall not go there. I forbid it.
He was ready to coax Rachel into the trip.
We go into the country. It looks nice there. And afterwards, how about Café Sacher and some Sacher torte? What do you say?
No, I will not go. Sacher torte. It is for the tourists, what ones we can get. Go in the countryside. I tell you, see what is left of Gusen.
Rachel stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Shortly after Rachel stormed out, Franz opened the door and looked in. He raised his eyebrows in query, asked,
Ist was?
Ist was? I'd say so, my friend. I suggested we go into the country, and I said we should head southeast of here. We haven't gone in that direction. It's a nice day, and you heard the door.
Franz looked sympathetic, shrugged, and offered,
Passiert?
Yes, happens. Something sure happened. I think I really stepped in it. She told me see what is left of Gusen. The way she said it, I'm sure it's no tourist attraction.
Franz nodded once and turned to leave. Before closing the door behind him, he quietly said,
Gusen, Konzentrationslager.
Harry realized what he'd suggested was they go see the nice countryside, near the site of a concentration camp.
How do I fix this?
Was his only thought. When Rachel arrived the next morning, she was dressed for another stroll, or reconnaissance of the Sonnenegg residence. Rachel took Harry's arm as always, but her arm was stiff, her pace more of a march than a stroll on a July day. Harry was ready to throw himself on his sword. He stopped on the way to the residence.
I didn't know. Swear to God, Rachel. I did not know about Gusen, about the camp. I'm sorry. I apologize for not knowing what I was asking for.
Rachel tilted her head forward slightly, signaling let's keep walking. Her pace slowed and her arm relaxed.
Oh, Harry dear. It's really not you I'm angry with. I'm angry with, I suppose, so many things. So many. They're not really people. They are the monsters, not you, my nice American monster.
Rachel tightened her arm again, but only to pull Harry closer, so they could continue to pretend to be a couple falling in love. It was only the pretending part which wasn't working well. There were backroom meetings, mostly only Rachel and Harry attended them. Of course they discussed Sonnenegg, ways in and out of the residence, and where Sonnenegg kept his alleged treasures. But they also talked about other topics. Rachel heard about growing up near Hagerstown. Harry heard about pre-war Vienna. Occasionally a Herr Jones came from. Rachel said he was from U.S. City Hall, which Harry took to mean it was none of his business where Jones came from. Everyone was collegial is as good a word as any, but Rachel was clearly ever so slightly deferential to Jones. He remained Herr Jones, who listened a lot and said little. More than once during Jones's visits, Harry was asked, told really, to leave the back room. The first time Harry'd been asked to leave, the suggestion had been, take a walk. It produced a very icy reply from Harry.
Once in the alley is enough, thank you.
Rachel and Jones had, in unison, said,
Cafe, please.
One of the few times Jones spoke at any length, it was directly to Harry.
Harry, about your recent The Welcome Committee? Too bad. Someone didn't remember walls have ears, eh? Reminded to be careful. Have to say. Cultural attaché. Embassy in Canberra?
Jones shook his head over the notion of someone being exiled to Australia. Harry shook his head over Jones's reluctance to complete a sentence, then marveled when Jones produced an almost complete question.
What do the Brits say? Least said, soonest mended?
And clapped Harry on the back. Damned if Harry would wince over being clapped where a particularly heavy boot had landed. The backroom meetings involved enough hot coffee and pastries to bring Harry to telling Rachel,
Dear, if we keep this up, we're both going to have to let seams out. And, insofar as I know, you can only alter silk once.
Thereafter, Harry and Rachel eyed the pastries, but mostly left them alone. Jones, once unbent enough to say the apfelstrudel reminded him of the apple pie, his mother, he'd said nothing further. The Salzburg Festival is a renowned music festival dating back to 1920. It was suspended during the war. On the 28th of July 1948, Gluck's opera, Orpheus and Eurydice, was to be conducted by the renowned conductor Herbert von Karajan. The demand for tickets was such one might use the idiom, I killed to get a ticket. To say Sonnenegg was a disagreeable, greedy man was actually an understatement. He had a couple of unhealthy interests which, were he found out in any civilized country, would have seen Sonnenegg in a prison cell, with the cell's key tossed far, far away. Be that as it may, in addition to unhealthy interests, Sonnenegg had weaknesses. Among them was a weakness for opera. Sonnenegg had done everything he could think of to get his hands on a ticket for von Karajan's appearance, and come up empty. He was entranced by the idea of getting a ticket. He wanted to hear and see von Karajan and the Berliner Philharmoniker, the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. To say he was not happy about not having a ticket is to say, Sonnenegg wanted a ticket, and no more needs to be said. Such was the ticket's rarity and value that Sonnenegg accepted, with some skepticism, a gift from a somewhat dubious character from Salzburg's lesser quarters. Sonnenegg mentioned a few things which could happen to his apprehensive benefactor if the ticket proved to be a forgery. The benefactor need not have worried. The ticket was very real, carefully selected, peremptorily, by someone listing his office as being in the U.S. City Hall. What Sonnenegg didn't know was his seat would be in the middle of 4 other carefully selected seats. Left, right, front, behind his seat. The 28th of July arrived. Sonnenegg attended the gala opera alone, he thought. Those sitting to either side, or in front or back, thanked their agency, supplied training they could endure being near him. Their job was to assure Harry and Rachel's investigation of Sonnenegg's claimed to be Etruscan treasures would not be interrupted. If Sonnenegg left unexpectedly, those seated near him had the task of ensuring Rachel and Harry were told, "Get out." He left the Felsenreitschule Theater. Remember, Sonnenegg had weaknesses. While he was obsessed, to a fault, with opera, he was forgetful, to a fault, about locking doors. Perhaps Sonnenegg thought, I am the feared Sonnenegg. None would dare. What Sonnenegg might have thought was of little matter to Rachel or Harry as they surreptitiously went over a previously inspected residence garden wall. What they knew was Sonnenegg was forgetful about locking doors. Nonetheless, should Sonnenegg forget to be forgetful about locking a door, Rachel had great skill with lockpicks. Old Joseph, or as rendered in the local dialect, Alte Sepp was the only staff residing at the residence. His routine had been found out by a couple who repeatedly walked by, arm in arm, at various hours. His face was concealed by any one of a number of wide-brimmed fedoras. Her face was concealed by one of a variety of ridiculously wide-brimmed summer hats. More than once they'd laughed gaily, as if they were caught up in a late summer love. Once over the garden wall, and in through the service door to the wine cellar, Harry and Rachel set about their reason for the visit to the residence. Harry determined the claim to be Etruscan treasures were quite the modern thing, and poor forgeries at that. Rachel took careful notes, and deftly made detailed sketches of particular points confirming the forgeries. It wasn't until Harry and Rachel were toasting their success, with a particularly nice light Austrian Blaufränkisch wine, that they laughed over the irony of Sonnenegg, the fraudster, being defrauded over his so-called Etruscan treasures. Their after-action report was summarized as, Sonnenegg's got nothing, recommendation, take him off the playing field. The Salzburg police received, from U.S. City Hall, a curt tip about Sonnenegg's unhealthy interests. The tip was not so curt as to omit actionable information regarding Sonnenegg. The memory of von Karajan conducting Orpheus and Eurydice was still fresh in Sonnenegg's mind, as he was arrested and taken off to a holding cell. It was the first of many cells he'd be in before he came to the one in which he'd have more than enough time to fully recall von Karajan's performance at the Felsenreitschule. The Policykommissar's reaction to the curt tip wasn't what Rachel had expected. He accepted the gift without complaint. He'd had his eye on Sonnenegg and was pleased to receive a certain piece of evidence supplied with the curt tip. With Sonnenegg off the playing field, the reason for Harry's trip to Salzburg was gone. Harry received a curt note.
Per diem ends 14 days from yesterday. Travel voucher attached.
He wasn't surprised. Thank you was missing from the note. It was, after all, a curt note from a curt man. By the time Rachel saw Harry climb into the jeep going back to the Salzburg airfield, they'd given up any pretense of playing the couple, finding they were drawn together by more than mutual business interests. They were that couple. Rachel had stopped checking for rain and accepted Harry's embrace, offered as shelter from tragic memories. Other embraces and kisses happened because such couples share embraces and kisses for all the right reasons. They waited, at the Hauptbahnhof, for the army driver to arrive. A playful breeze conveniently opened Rachel's raincoat, or maybe she playfully helped the breeze open it. Regardless of why the raincoat opened, Harry definitely noticed the cheongsam he'd never seen before. Fearing rain would spot the silk dress, the raincoat was quickly closed again.
This cheongsam is very special. It was in the last package from my grandfather, shortly before the Japanese invaded Manchuria.
Harry's puzzled look brought him an answer.
Oma always said springtime foolishness ran away with them. She knew they could not last. But they remained friends, if only by letters and the occasional package. He was not young then, and too much has happened since. I've asked those who might know someone who might know something, but it's asking too many questions across too many lines. For me, it's almost certain he's gone. So, I wear this only on very special occasions. And I tell you when you see it next. Perhaps you will find it keeps its shape with only my help, and I'll wear nothing to help me, eh?
Rachel's husky laugh filled in whatever might have been missing from what she said. The same corporal who'd brought Harry to the train station put Harry's bags inside the jeep's canvas cover. As he did, Harry and Rachel shared an embrace and kiss both feared would not go on long enough. The corporal announced, "Sir, they won't hold the flight." Rachel and Harry reluctantly accepted the obvious. It was time for Harry to leave Salzburg, and Rachel. Harry climbed through the jeep's open door, which the corporal impatiently closed behind him. What the curt man had unintentionally put together, he had also put asunder. Harry resolved to find more unpleasant curses to bring down on the curt man's head. While flying back to Southampton and bouncing through the late summer air, Harry thought,
Who was it at the British Museum that told me about a couple of curses he'd found in Herculaneum? Said they were rather close to the bone. I wonder if...
As can be the way of things in the shadowy world of espionage, the man with the eggshell skull was someone a little too well placed in the Soviet intelligence apparat. That he was placed, as it were, was known. Too well placed was not known when it mattered. Thus the hotel room cleaners didn't rush to let the Soviet apparat know one of their agents had met with an unfortunate accident while crossing Suchiroller Platz, which lies adjacent to the train station. The man's papers indicated Paul Muller had a room in a small hotel in Salzburg's Old Town. A search for the address of his next of kin had produced an otherwise well-concealed Russian passport. It took a while before the Soviet delegation in Salzburg was advised of the passing of one Grigory Pavlovich Milyukov. With the notification was a conveniently obtained police report about the unfortunate matter. The report included a remorseful statement made by a cabbie hurrying to drop his fare before the express train to Munich left. His passenger was reported to have shouted, "Watch out," on spotting Miller, as was, stepping into the road. The cab had swerved, the pedestrian sprang back, fell heavily, his head struck the sharp edge of freshly installed curbing. Crossing a street in the middle of the block, not at the pedestrian, zebra stripes. What can one expect?
Tragic. Sergei. Absolutely tragic,
murmured a U.S. City Hall functionary.
I hear the cabbie left the business over it.
At this point, Miller Milyukov passed from the U.S. record. Nobody in U.S. City Hall, or anywhere up the line, much cared about him. They struck his name off the appropriate Agents Active Austria list. In the depths of the Soviet enclave, however, there was displeasure with the loss of a not-so-mid-level agent. From Moscow there was stronger displeasure over the loss of the son, albeit estranged, of a Politburo member. The message to the enclave in Salzburg was to the point.
Avenge Comrade Milyukov soonest.
A certain doorman was too willing to share, with a colleague of the late Milyukov, what he knew of a woman with amazingly black hair, jade green eyes, and stunning figure. More importantly, he remembered Herr Muller, had this very woman on his arm as they'd entered the doorman's hotel. A bullet from a Tokarev pistol prevented the doorman from sharing. Should someone else have asked, his account of being interviewed by the late Milyukov's colleague. The Tokarev's, shall we say, operator, charged with finding the woman with amazingly black hair, etc., acted on what he'd learned from the late certain doorman. Fortunately for Rachel's and Harry's sake, someone on our side recognized the operator from not our side as he lurked in the dim alleyway near a certain Salzburg cafe, noted for its Apfelstrudel, hot coffee, and high volume of constantly changing customers. Had Harry still been in Salzburg, he might have identified the operator as the drunk who'd collided with Rachel. Regardless of Harry's absence or presence, a note was surreptitiously passed to Franz. A Tokarev joined Franz's weapons collection. The Tokarev's operator was no longer a problem. However, Rachel had a problem. By early October it was clear, as people who write spy novels are wont to say, her cover was blown. The Soviets had a grouch on about losing Milyukov, the too well-placed son, albeit estranged, of a Politburo member. After Franz added another gun to his collection, this one an odd check-made pistol with a huge silencer, Rachel was curtly advised Salzburg, and probably much of Austria, was too hot for her. It didn't matter, it was now November, and snow covered the higher elevations around the city. Ignoring the heat could have very real mortal consequences for Rachel. Her employer held,
"Your staying briefed in is preferred over briefing you out. We're in no hurry to let you leave us. You know things we don't want shared with anybody else. We're sending you somewhere cooler."
Rachel had a ticket to the U.S., specifically a ticket for a westbound flight on a Pan American Airlines Constellation airliner crossing the Atlantic. She willingly traded rubble piles, shortages, and long market queues for being parked, far too often, far too long, in rush-hour traffic on Washington, D.C.'s Massachusetts Avenue. Her commute was to and from a certain anonymous government building. In that anonymous building, she was now a moderate-sized cog in a big machine, and her requests for oil were listened to more often. Early on in her commutes, any car too close to Rachel's car raised her pulse. Did the driver looking at her come from a very unfriendly embassy, or was he only impatient and trying to tell Rachel to get moving? With time, she realized the number of looks she got in traffic was mostly related to whether or not the driver was male, and her skirt had slid up a little higher than prudent. More importantly, Rachel was now within easy driving distance of College Park, home to the University of Maryland. The university numbered among its tenured faculty a professor of art history who specialized in Etruscan studies. He was noted for his penchant for going over garden walls instead of through garden gates possibly rigged with alarms. A month after hotly demanding oil for a particularly squeaky problem, the big machine's new upper management announced it liked its own, less demanding cogs. As a result, the new upper management held,
"Briefing you out is preferred over your staying briefed in."
They added, in summary,
"You are sworn never to speak of things not spoken of, and we have ways of knowing what you speak about. Go away, Lindstrom."
Like Harry, she didn't receive a thank you. With no regular salary to pay a regular rent, Rachel did the sensible thing. She called Harry. She got right to the point.
I've been jarred.
"Canned,"
he said distractedly.
Macht nichts. I'm out of a job which I can't speak about. Which means finding a new job is going to be a problem. Which means paying my rent is going to be a problem. Which means,
"Dear, you'll stop wasting time standing in traffic jams on Massachusetts Avenue and move in with me."
Which means Rachel and Harry had figured out, again, how to put things right. One gentle springtime evening, Rachel walked out to the flower garden at the foot of the flagstone path to Harry's front door. She wondered which flowers might be coming up after the recent late snowfall melted. A few hardy crocuses had pushed their way through the remaining snow. They looked much like the flowers Rachel's Oma had described long ago.
when Chen so kindly asked me about the crocuses, I knew I was his for all time.
As Rachel looked at the yellow crocuses which almost blended with the white snow, an early robin sang its song. The evening breeze sighed softly in nearby pines. The ground, moistened by melting snow, released a rich, fertile earth scent which hinted at flowers yet to come. After a last look at the crocuses in the snow, Rachel went back inside what she now knew would be her home. It was time to wear the very special cheongsam her grandfather had sent in his last package. Harry was in his study, hard at work on a manuscript. It was for his book about ways to detect fraudulent Etruscan art. He fervently hoped the book wouldn't attract the attention of the Kurt men or the FBI. When Rachel walked in and put her hand on his shoulder lightly, he was mildly irritated by the interruption. The irritation dissipated when he saw Rachel was, for the second time, wearing her very special cheongsam. Her words before they parted at the Hauptbahnhof came back to him readily. After she opened the dress's third button, Harry saw it was Rachel alone who gave her very special cheongsam a most pleasing shape. The manuscript was set aside. There was a much more important matter which required Harry's attention.